Hey there. Today, we delve into a story where legendary aviation meets groundbreaking innovation. Set amidst the jungles of Dutch New Guinea during 1944, where a civilian aviator's secret techniques nearly doubled the range of America's most formidable fighter, the P38 Lightning. But what if I told you that behind this astonishing breakthrough was a man who, only days after his first flight in this aircraft, began rewriting the rules of aerial combat? Could fuel management techniques rooted in decades-old experience truly transform wartime strategy? How did a man famous for crossing the Atlantic solo suddenly become a pioneer of extended-range fighter tactics in the Pacific? And what was the real story behind his daring combat victory over Japanese aircraft, one that, despite its significance, was never officially recorded? And finally, what does this all reveal about the power of expertise, innovation, and individual mastery in the chaos of war? In this video, we'll uncover how Lindbergh's unconventional methods shattered long-held beliefs, reshaped aerial warfare, and left a legacy that extended far beyond the skies. The most extraordinary part? The revolution in fighter range and tactics was driven not just by technology, but by one man's mastery of fuel efficiency, all learned in the crucible of combat. The journey into the heart of this story begins right now. June the 26th, in the year 1944, found itself marked by a scene set amidst the rugged surroundings of Hollandia Air Base, nestled in the dense jungles of Dutch New Guinea. The air was thick with humidity and anticipation, as an unfinished game of checkers sat abandoned on a makeshift table, forgotten in the midst of a much more consequential encounter. Lieutenant Colonel Charles MacDonald, a seasoned officer, sat intently studying the board, yet his gaze was interrupted as he looked up from the game to observe the man standing at his screen door. The visitor had just introduced himself, but for a moment, the name seemed to drift past MacDonald's immediate awareness, not registering in the forefront of his mind. Meanwhile, MacDonald's attention remained partly fixed on his ongoing game, played with Lieutenant Colonel Merrill Smith, the seasoned operations officer of Satan's Angels. The civilian visitor, who had just spoken, repeated his introduction with a steady, quiet confidence that had the power to momentarily halt MacDonald's thoughts. The man's name was Charles Lindberg, an identity so synonymous with aviation history that, in that instant, it seemed almost surreal to be in the same room with him. Lindberg, the legendary aviator celebrated across continents, was standing within a modest recreation hall, thousands of miles away from the familiar skies of America, seeking permission to discuss operations involving the P-38 Lightning fighters used in combat across the Pacific. What neither man realized at that very moment was that this unexpected interruption was on the verge of triggering a revolutionary shift in how long-range fighter operations would be conducted in the vast and challenging theater of the Pacific. Over the coming 6 weeks, Lindberg would impart techniques so groundbreaking that they would nearly double the combat radius of the formidable Lockheed P-38 Lightning, extending its reach by nearly 400 miles. This transformation would turn what had once been considered impossible, missions that seemed to push the limits of aircraft endurance, into standard, everyday operational procedures for the United States Army Air Forces. The story behind how a civilian consultant like Lindberg managed to so significantly expand the capabilities of America's premier twin-engine fighter is far more than just a tale of technical innovation. It is a compelling narrative about overcoming deep-seated institutional resistance, driven by the compelling weight of objective evidence that convinced pilots to place more trust in mathematical calculations than in their instincts. At its core, it is the story of one man's exceptional mastery of fuel efficiency, a skill that would prove instrumental in shifting the very course of aerial combat in the Pacific. This transformation was not merely the product of new engineering manuals or theoretical calculations penned in offices. Instead, it was written in the daily experiences of pilots who learned that much of what they had been taught about engine management was incomplete, if not outright flawed. The seemingly impossible, vastly extended ranges, was about to become the new routine, and the teacher behind this revolutionary change was a man who, at 42 years old, had only taken his first flight in a P38 Lightning just 3 days prior. The path that brought Charles Lindberg to that screen door at Hollandia goes back 17 years earlier, across the vast Atlantic Ocean. It was during the night of May the 20th into the 21st of 1927 that Lindberg achieved a feat that forever altered the course of aviation history. Flying solo from New York to Paris, a distance of approximately 3,600 miles, he completed this daring crossing in just 33.5 hours, a feat that captured the imagination of the entire world. Lindbergh's aircraft, the Ryan NYP monoplane famously named the Spirit of St. Louis, carried an astonishing load of fuel, 450 gallons, in tanks so large that they obstructed forward visibility, forcing him to navigate by periscope and dead reckoning. His meticulous management of fuel consumption was so precise that on landing at Labor Field, he had a remaining 85 gallons of fuel, a margin that experts of the era would have considered practically impossible for an aircraft powered by a radial engine of that type. This singular focus on fuel efficiency and management became Lindbergh's defining technical hallmark. Throughout the 1930s, as he conducted survey flights for Pan American Airways across the vast expanses of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, Lindbergh continued to refine his techniques, pushing the boundaries of what was believed to be achievable. He understood that the published range figures offered by manufacturers represented average values, not absolute limits, and that every aircraft had an optimal operating envelope. Within this envelope, parameters such as engine power, fuel consumption, and mechanical stress could be balanced to achieve maximum efficiency. Discovering this delicate balance required a deep understanding of the relationships between manifold pressure, propeller pitch, engine performance, and fuel flow, an understanding Lindbergh mastered through relentless experimentation. His keen insight and innovative approach to engine management would ultimately prove instrumental in enabling longer, more daring flights and, later, in revolutionizing fighter tactics during the war. By the year of 1944, Charles Lindbergh had undeniably established himself as one of the most renowned authorities on long-range aviation in the entire world. His extensive knowledge and pioneering experiences in aviation had elevated him to a position of international prestige, particularly concerning the nuances of flight beyond typical commercial or military standards. Yet, despite his technical mastery and legendary status as a pioneering aviator, Lindbergh's relationship with the United States military and the government was complex, complicated by his steadfast political beliefs and pre-war stance of isolationism. Throughout the years leading up to America's entry into World War II, Lindbergh had been an outspoken advocate for keeping the United States out of European conflicts. He championed the cause of American neutrality, passionately warning against involvement in foreign wars, particularly those in Europe that he believed could be better avoided. His vocal opposition to American intervention gained him a prominent role as a leader within the America First Committee, an influential organization dedicated to preventing U.S. engagement in the ongoing global conflicts. These views, however commendable to some, earned him the enmity of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who viewed Lindbergh's isolationist stance with suspicion and disapproval, especially as the threat from Axis powers intensified. The tension reached its peak on April 29, 1941, when Roosevelt publicly compared Lindbergh to Clement Vallandigham, a Confederate sympathizer from the Civil War era. This comparison further distanced Lindberg from the Washington establishment and the military circles that supported intervention. Consequently, Lindberg stepped down from his position as a colonel in the Army Air Corps Reserve, choosing to resign his commission amid the controversy. Despite this setback, the inherent expertise Lindberg possessed could not be easily dismissed or silenced. When the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, catapulted the United States into the global conflict, Lindberg was eager to serve his country. His desire to contribute was rekindled, yet official channels were closed to him. Roosevelt had explicitly made certain that Lindberg would not don an American military uniform during the war, effectively barring him from active military service. Nevertheless, Lindberg's exceptional skills and deep understanding of aircraft and aeronautical engineering found alternative avenues of service, as his reputation as an aviation expert remained highly valuable to the nation's war effort. Unable to serve as a military officer on active duty, Lindberg took on the role of a civilian technical consultant for several aircraft manufacturing companies. In 1943, he joined the United Aircraft Corporation, where he worked extensively with their Chance Vault division, an innovative department tasked with the development and testing of cutting-edge aircraft designs, including the illustrious F-4U Corsair fighter plane. His involvement extended to troubleshooting production issues at Ford's Willow Run plant, where he addressed challenges associated with the assembly of B-24 Liberator bombers. Additionally, Lindberg participated in high-altitude flight testing aboard P-47 Thunderbolts, analyzing engine performance under extreme conditions, and contributed to refining dive bombing techniques with the Corsair, helping to improve its combat effectiveness. His technical contributions to the war effort were vast and impactful. However, a deep-seated desire to actively participate in combat missions still burned within him. By early 1944, Lindberg saw an opportunity to bridge the gap between his technical expertise and his craving for frontline service. Recognizing the need for specialized knowledge of fighter aircraft in the Pacific theater, and knowing that the American forces mainly relied on the P-38 Lightning among twin-engine fighters, Lindberg persuaded United Aircraft to endorse his deployment to the Pacific. His goal was to observe P-38 operations firsthand under actual combat conditions, gathering vital intelligence that could inform future tactics and designs. On April 3, 1944, Lindberg prepared meticulously for his deployment to the South Pacific. As part of his preparations, he visited a Brooks Brothers store in New York City to acquire a naval officer's uniform, intentionally selecting one without insignia to maintain a low profile. He also visited Brentano's bookstore to purchase a small New Testament, a personal item which he carefully documented in his journal that very day, noting, "Since I can only carry one book and a very small one, that is my choice." His reflections hinted at both his pragmatic approach and his deeper philosophical considerations. "It would not have been a decade ago, but the more I learn and the more I read, the less competition it has," he wrote, emphasizing his ongoing desire for learning and understanding. Leaving San Diego on April 24, his official destination was to be the Marine Corps aviation bases in the South Pacific, around Guadalcanal. The trip, sanctioned by the Navy Department, was kept strictly confidential, even from the White House. Neither President Roosevelt nor Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox was aware that Lindberg was heading into a war zone. What began as a mere observational assignment gradually evolved into something more significant when Marine Corps aviation officers extended an invitation for Lind. The story extended far beyond mere theoretical knowledge, venturing into practical application and hands-on problem solving. In collaboration with pilots from the Corsair Squadron, Lindberg demonstrated how to execute takeoffs that were both safe and efficient, even when carrying bomb loads that doubled the aircraft's official maximum payload as specified by the F-4U's design limitations. During this period, the Marine Corps had been experiencing a troubling number of aircraft losses directly attributable to the dangers of overweight takeoff accidents. Recognizing this critical issue, Lindberg conducted a meticulous analysis of various parameters, including power settings, takeoff speeds, and the distribution of weight within the aircraft. His careful calculations and adjustments led to a significant reduction in these accidents, all while simultaneously enhancing the strike capability of the aircraft. Word spread swiftly across the vast Pacific theater of operations that a renowned aviator, famous for his pioneering flights and innovations, was now actively flying combat missions as a civilian contractor, while also addressing complex operational challenges that had confounded military pilots for months. By the middle of June in the year 1944, Lindberg's curiosity was increasingly drawn toward the P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine fighter aircraft that held strategic importance in the Pacific. The interest displayed by United Aircraft, the manufacturer of the P-38, in the development and deployment of twin-engine fighters was genuine and earnest. However, Lindberg had also learned that the 475th Fighter Group, nicknamed Satan's Angels, had established itself as one of the most formidable Lightning units operating in the Pacific. Recognizing that if he truly wanted to deepen his understanding of the P-38, the best place to do so was with this elite unit, he decided to go there. On June 15, 1944, Lindberg arranged for a flight to Dutch New Guinea, a key location in the theater. Upon arrival, he made his presence known to the headquarters of the 5th Air Force stationed at Nadsab, where he was greeted and briefly hosted by Colonel Marion Cooper during lunch. A few days later, on the evening of June 18, Lindberg had dinner with General Enos Whitehead, engaging in discussions about recent developments in New Guinea and sharing his plans to observe the operations and tactics of P-38 pilots more closely. This authorization, which was quite informal, unofficial, and not strictly aligned with military procedures, was granted more on the strength of personal trust and Lindberg's demonstrated expertise than on formal paperwork. In the often fluid and dynamic command structure of the Southwest Pacific Theater, such informal arrangements and personal connections frequently proved to be more effective than rigid bureaucratic processes. As part of his immersion, on June 20, Lindberg spent roughly an hour and 20 minutes undergoing a practical checkout in a P-38 fighter, flying with the squadron known as the 35th of the 8th Fighter Group. This was his initial experience in the unmistakably distinctive twin-boom aircraft, an aircraft that was legendary for its unique design and formidable performance. 6 days later, on June 26, Lindberg traveled to Hollandia, where he unexpectedly joined Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald, a 29-year-old seasoned fighter ace credited with 10 confirmed victories. MacDonald commanded the same 475th Fighter Group, which had been activated in Australia on May 14, 1943, and had since distinguished itself as one of the highest-scoring P-38 units within the entire Pacific Theater. The group's 3 squadrons, namely the 431st, 432nd, and 433rd, were equipped with the latest models of the P-38J aircraft, featuring improved intercoolers that enhanced performance and additional fuel tanks that extended operational range. These Lightning fighters were renowned for their exceptional endurance, making them the longest-range fighters available in the Pacific Theater at the time. Their extended range enabled them to undertake missions that no other aircraft could manage effectively. However, despite the improvements, the operational radius of the P-38 remained limited when undertaking long-distance missions. These missions, aimed at distant targets, often left pilots with very little fuel for tactical maneuvers in combat, forcing them to return with low fuel levels that made emergency situations risky. Several aircraft had been lost when unforeseen weather conditions forced pilots to deviate from their planned routes, causing fuel consumption to exceed available reserves. Initially, MacDonald had politely dismissed Lindbergh's presence, returning to his checkers game without much fuss. But when Lindbergh explained that he had been sent by General Hutchinson, the commander of the 3rd Air Task Force, to discuss combat operations involving P-38s, MacDonald's interest was piqued. After a brief but attentive conversation, MacDonald asked whether Lindbergh would be interested in flying a mission the following day. With enthusiasm, Lindbergh agreed to participate. The mission was scheduled to launch at dawn, and rather than returning to the main headquarters afterward, MacDonald suggested that Lindbergh stay at the 475th Fighter Group's camp to facilitate a more comprehensive understanding of their operations. As the logistical challenges of transportation loomed large, word of Lindbergh's arrival and participation in combat missions quickly spread throughout the military unit, creating a buzz that rippled through the ranks. When Charles Lindbergh, the celebrated aviator of legendary fame, settled into a spare cot provided for him, speculation and curiosity ran high among the soldiers and pilots alike. Lindbergh was now flying alongside what could be described as Satan's angels, an evocative nickname that underscored the formidable reputation of the P-38 Lightning fighters he now piloted. The response among his fellow pilots was anything but uniform. Some greeted his appearance with enthusiasm and anticipation, while others harbored skepticism. Lieutenant John Purdy, a member of the 433rd Squadron, eagerly looked forward to the opportunity to meet and observe the legendary flyer in action, eager to see firsthand whether the stories held truth. Meanwhile, other pilots voiced doubts about Lindbergh's ability to keep pace with the relentless demands of modern aerial combat, especially considering his age and civilian background. Some questioned whether a man aged only 42, regardless of his fame, could effectively handle the intense pressures of contemporary wartime flying. Major Thomas Maguire, a seasoned veteran with an impressive record of 15 confirmed victories, a tally that made him a formidable ace, was particularly interested. As someone who would go on to become America's second highest scoring fighter pilot with a total of 38 confirmed kills, Maguire was keen to evaluate what skills, if any, the civilian-turned-warrior could bring to the dangerous cockpit. On the dawn of June 27, 1944, Lindbergh prepared meticulously for what would be his inaugural combat mission in a P-38 Lightning. The morning skies were shrouded in gloom, with steady rain dampening the air, starting at roughly 5:55 in the morning. As the hours passed, by the time the aircraft finally lifted off at about 10:30, the weather had shown signs of improvement, the rain easing enough to allow for takeoff. Under the command of MacDonald, a seasoned leader, the 4 aircraft set course toward Jeffman Island and Smart Airfield, both frequent targets for the pursuit squadron designated the 475th. Lindbergh was assigned to fly as Blue 3, positioned on Major Maguire's wing, an arrangement that allowed him to stay close and benefit from the veteran's leadership and tactical acumen. Merrill Smith, an ace with a tally of 8 confirmed victories, was in another aircraft. As the formation coalesced, MacDonald kept a keen eye on Lindbergh, observing him seamlessly fall into formation with precision and ease, despite having only recently completed his training in the P-38. His flying was remarkably smooth and flawlessly coordinated, a testament to his natural aptitude and careful preparation. The mission itself aimed to strafe an enemy barge located in Kaibos Bay, a strategic objective that required not only speed but also precise maneuvering through the dangerous defenses of anti-aircraft fire. Lindberg, navigating through the barrage with a steady hand, unleashed a furious barrage of cannon and machine gun fire onto the target. His fire tore into the vessel, causing explosions and chaos, signaling a successful attack. The 4 aircraft then safely returned to base, completing the mission without incident. However, it was after their return that the ground crew made a discovery that would have far-reaching implications. When mechanics examined Lindberg's P38 after several sorties, they noticed a curious pattern. His plane consistently returned with substantially more fuel remaining than other aircraft engaged in the same missions. This observation piqued their interest and raised questions about the aircraft's fuel consumption. On the 6.5-hour-long armed reconnaissance mission conducted on July 1, Lindberg's aircraft returned with an astonishing 210 gallons of fuel still in its tanks. In contrast, other pilots involved in the same operation, who flew identical routes and missions, reported their gauges showing near empty tanks, a stark discrepancy that could not be ignored. Just 2 days later, on July 3, the squadron was tasked with escorting 16 B-25 bombers on a strike against Jeffman Island. After the bombing run, the Lightning pilots shifted to a mission of barging, hunting down enemy vessels on the water. During this subsequent operation, 2 of the pilots reported dwindling fuel reserves and broke off early, returning to base. Lindberg, however, continued with the mission, his gauges still indicating comfortable reserves, an unusual and intriguing difference compared to his fellow pilots. It was this consistent and inexplicable fuel efficiency that caught McDonald's attention. Recognizing the potential significance of this anomaly, the squadron leader summoned a meeting. 2 days after Lindberg's arrival, the colonel assembled the pilots of the 475th in their modest recreation hall, a rather primitive facility marked by a dirt floor beneath a palm noose roof, furnished minimally with a ping-pong table and a few decks of cards. As the pilots gathered under harsh unshaded light bulbs, McDonald were performing well, and fuel consumption was noticeably lower than usual, which sparked cautious optimism among the crew. As confidence grew, some pilots extended their test flights, pushing the limits of these new parameters while carefully monitoring engine temperatures, oil pressure, and sound cues for signs of trouble. Despite the initial wariness, many began to see the potential benefits of adopting Lindberg's recommendations, especially given the pressing need for extended range during long reconnaissance missions. Over the course of several days, the group of pilots, once skeptical and wary, gradually transitioned from tentative experimentation to strategic application. They carefully adjusted their engine settings, moving from the conservative, traditional cruise parameters to Lindberg's suggested figures. Lowering RPM to around 1,600, increasing manifold pressure slightly beyond the normal, and setting the mixture to autolean. Each flight was meticulously logged, with detailed notes on engine behavior, fuel consumption, and overall performance. The results consistently showed a marked decrease in fuel use, sometimes reducing consumption by nearly 30%, without any immediate or visible signs of engine distress. This method, once dismissed by many as too risky, was beginning to earn cautious acceptance. The pilots saw that operating at these lower RPMs, while maintaining a slightly higher manifold pressure, did not necessarily cause the engine damage they had been warned about during training. Instead, it offered a practical way to extend flight duration while preserving the aircraft's operational integrity. As their confidence solidified, some pilots even began to consider these techniques as a tactical advantage, enabling longer missions with less fuel and greater flexibility in the field. However, Doubts and concerns still lingered among the crew, especially considering the fundamental principles of engine operation they had been drilled into since their training days. The concept of running engines, over square, that is, with manifold pressure exceeding RPM, was traditionally associated with increased wear and catastrophic failure. Military flight instruction had explicitly warned against this practice, emphasizing that it could cause engine knocking, overheating, and ultimately, engine destruction. The risk of detonation, which could quickly lead to severe cylinder head overheating and a total engine failure, was considered too high to ignore. The fact that Lindberg, an outsider speaking from a civilian background, was advocating for this seemingly unorthodox approach created an undercurrent of skepticism in the room. Several seasoned pilots exchanged wary glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief or outright disagreement. One pilot openly voiced his concerns, calling Lindberg's technique dangerous and potentially reckless, insisting that it was an invitation to engine catastrophe. The overall atmosphere was tense, as traditional doctrines clashed with emerging experimental evidence. Yet, Captain MacDonald, commanding officer of the unit, recognized that there was more to this than just theory and warnings. Lindberg was not merely theorizing, he had real-world experience. He had flown combat missions utilizing these very settings, and his aircraft had consistently returned without engine failures. His P-38s had demonstrated resilience under conditions that, according to established doctrine, should have been damaging. The notable absence of engine troubles in Lindberg's flights suggested that, under controlled conditions and careful monitoring, this approach could be both safe and advantageous. Seeing the potential, MacDonald decided to put Lindberg's technique to a rigorous practical test. The stakes were high. If successful, the 475th Squadron could gain a significant operational edge, extending their range and mission duration, which could prove decisive in reconnaissance or interception tasks. If it failed, the risks of engine failure would be swiftly apparent, allowing the pilots to revert to their traditional, more conservative methods. Over the following week, pilots began to experiment more systematically with Lindberg's proposed settings. They started with short, controlled flights, enough to gather critical data without risking long-term damage, so they could quickly return to base if signs of engine trouble appeared. Many pilots reported, with a mix of nervousness and relief, that their engines responded well to the adjustments. They noted lower fuel consumption, enabling them to stay aloft longer than before, and the engines seemed to operate smoothly without overheating or unusual noises. As confidence grew among the crew, some pilots extended their test flights, carefully documenting every aspect of engine performance and fuel savings. The initial cautious approach evolved into more confident, longer flights, with the pilots diligently observing all operational parameters. The feedback was promising. Engines maintained stable temperatures and pressures, oil pressures remained within acceptable ranges, and fuel efficiency improved significantly. In some cases, fuel consumption was reduced by as much as 25 to 30%, translating into meaningful operational flexibility. Despite these encouraging signs, a residual wariness persisted among the seasoned pilots, rooted in deeply ingrained training and military doctrine that warned against the practice of running engines over square. They understood that such operation could cause detonation, cylinder head overheating, and potentially catastrophic engine failure if not carefully managed. This lingering suspicion underscored the gravity of the challenge, adopting a new technique that contradicts long-standing principles of engine maintenance and operation. Nevertheless, the accumulating empirical evidence from Lindberg's flights challenged the prevailing assumptions, prompting some to reconsider established doctrines. The performance of the aircraft at lower RPM settings was noticeably different, yet in a way that was manageable and, ultimately, advantageous. The deep, resonant rumble emitted by the Allison V1710 engines shifted in tone and character, providing a distinct auditory cue, yet despite this change, the temperature gauges that pilots closely monitored remained steady and within normal operating ranges. Similarly, oil pressure readings stayed comfortably within acceptable limits, indicating that the engines were not experiencing undue stress or risk of overheating. Most notably, the temperature of the cylinder heads, the critical metric for detecting engine detonation, actually registered cooler than they did at higher RPM settings, reinforcing the idea that lower RPM operation was not only safe but potentially beneficial for engine health. As confidence in this unconventional technique grew through repeated successful applications, pilots began deploying Lindberg's methods during longer and more complex missions. The fuel savings achieved through this approach were so substantial that they became impossible to ignore. Previously, missions that required pilots to make an immediate return to base after engaging a target, due to limited fuel reserves, could now be extended to include prolonged combat air patrols. This breakthrough opened new strategic possibilities, allowing aircraft to remain in a combat zone longer, effectively increasing their operational range without additional fuel or support. Prior to adopting these methods, flights frequently demanded meticulous fuel management, with pilots constantly calculating and monitoring consumption to ensure they could complete their missions and return safely. With the new technique, flights often concluded with significant fuel reserves still on board, so much so that the effective combat radius of the P38 Lightning, which had been roughly around 570 miles, was extended progressively to about 700 miles, and then to as much as 750 miles. This meant that pilots could now reach targets previously deemed beyond the aircraft's reach, engage in combat for approximately 15 minutes over the target area, and still have enough fuel left to make a safe return with a full hour's reserve. This transformation in operational capability was nothing short of revolutionary. The initial skepticism among some pilots and commanders gradually dissipated as successive missions consistently demonstrated that Lindberg's technique was both practical and highly effective. Lindberg himself became a regular participant in combat missions with the 475th Fighter Group, accumulating valuable combat hours and serving as a living example of his method's benefits. His presence in the cockpit and leadership during these flights helped to dispel doubts about the safety and feasibility of operating under lower RPM settings. Lindberg's leadership extended beyond mere participation. He frequently led flights, confidently demonstrating that a civilian observer, with specialized knowledge and understanding, could handle combat situations with a competence equal to, if not surpassing, that of seasoned military pilots. On such missions, his call sign was simply, Mr. Lindberg, a mark of respect and recognition of his dual role as an aviator and innovator. During these flights, he took the opportunity to explain the underlying physics of his fuel efficiency technique, helping his fellow pilots grasp not just the how, but the why behind these adjustments. He clarified that aircraft engines generate power by burning fuel to create pressure, which then drives the pistons. The key to efficiency lies in optimizing fuel consumption by producing enough power for the mission's needs without excess. The crux of Lindberg's approach was to maximize engine efficiency by adjusting operational parameters. Traditionally, pilots used high RPM cruise settings, which delivered plenty of power but also resulted in significant fuel waste due to rapid engine cycling. Lindberg's method involved reducing engine RPM while increasing manifold pressure, specifically, maintaining a manifold pressure around 30 inches of mercury. This combination allowed engines to produce comparable power with fewer combustion cycles, each cycle consuming fuel more efficiently. The lean mixture setting further enhanced this efficiency, providing just enough fuel to ensure complete combustion, and avoiding the excess fuel consumption typical in auto-rich mode, used generally for engine cooling at high power levels. Importantly, the engines did not risk detonation, a potentially destructive knocking, because although the power setting was considered over square by ratio, it was far below the high power thresholds used during takeoff or combat. The manifold pressure of 30 inches was indeed moderate, emphasizing the point that this was not full throttle operation. Rather, it was a sustainable, controlled setting. Additionally, operating at lower RPM reduced mechanical stress on engine components, extending their operational life and reducing maintenance needs. Lindberg emphasized that this technique was not inherently dangerous. It represented a different operational philosophy than what had been traditionally taught, one that prioritized efficiency and engine longevity over maximum power output. His expertise in this domain was rooted in years of extensive experience with long-range flight, dating back to his historic 17,000-mile crossing of the Atlantic in 1927. That pioneering flight had shown him that the published specifications of aircraft and engines were merely starting points, not absolute limits to safe operation. Further, his work with Pan American Airways in the 1930s, where he was involved in surveying and establishing trans-Pacific and transatlantic routes, had provided him with thousands of additional flying hours, much of it devoted to experimenting with during the period when experimental cruise techniques were being developed and refined. Pilots understood that they could rely on the additional engine power of their aircraft to return safely to base, even if one engine failed during a mission. On the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where mechanical failures could spell disaster, either resulting in drowning, if a pilot was forced to ditch into the sea, or capture by the Japanese forces, most pilots flying single-engine fighters maintained a cautious, conservative approach. They flew with a focus on preserving their aircraft and minimizing risk, knowing that any loss of power or control could be catastrophic in the open water far from friendly aid. However, in the case of the P38 Lightning, the aircraft's inherent redundancy, its twin-engine design, offered a significant safety margin that allowed pilots to push the envelope more confidently. This added margin encouraged them to explore the aircraft's operational limits, including long-range cruise techniques that might have been too risky otherwise. Lindberg, who was involved in pioneering these methods, understood that the supply situation supported a calculated level of risk. The availability of spare V-1710 engines and a steady stream of parts being shipped into the Pacific meant that if an engine required replacement after experimental use, ground crews could promptly install a fresh power plant, minimizing downtime and maintaining operational readiness. This strategic approach, extending the aircraft's range and endurance, was justified by the operational benefits gained. Lindberg recognized that accepting a small increase in engine wear and tear was a worthwhile trade-off for the extended range and increased mission safety it provided. His cautious yet innovative cruise techniques proved to be effective. No engines failed as a result of his methods during these long-range sorties. By the end of July in the year of 1944, Lindberg's cruise control techniques had begun to spread throughout the 5th Air Force's P-38 units, influencing tactical practices across the theater. The remarkable success of the 475th Fighter Group, which had adopted Lindberg's techniques, became impossible to ignore. News of their achievements and the operational advantages they enjoyed circulated quickly among other squadrons. Pilots shared stories, exchanged insights, and discussed the benefits of the new cruise procedures. Ground crews meticulously analyzed fuel consumption data, confirming that the new techniques resulted in more efficient and extended operational ranges. Inspired by these results, other commanders expressed a strong desire to replicate the advantages that Satan's Angels had gained. Lindberg responded to this growing interest by delivering additional detailed presentations to pilots from different units. He explained the new cruise techniques patiently and thoroughly, addressing technical questions and concerns related to engine safety and reliability. Adoption of these procedures was not instantaneous or universal, it progressed gradually. However, over time, more units embraced Lindberg's methods, recognizing their strategic value. The most dramatic demonstration of the effectiveness of these techniques occurred on the 28th of July, 1944, involving Lindberg himself with the 475th Fighter Group. The mission was an escort for bombers heading into the Sarum area, with Lindberg flying as Blue 3 in a 4-ship formation over El Puti Bay. During this patrol, Blue Flight encountered a pair of enemy aircraft, a duo of Mitsubishi Ki-51 Sonas, lightly armed Japanese reconnaissance and ground attack planes. These aircraft had been returning from a mission searching for a missing Allied aircraft and belonged to the 73rd Independent Flying Chutai. One of the Sonas was flown by the unit's commanding officer, Captain Saburo Shimada, while the other was piloted by Sergeant Yokogi. The American fighters launched an attack on the Japanese aircraft, which were clearly outmatched by the faster, more heavily armed P-38 Lightnings. The Sonas, being slower and less maneuverable, seemed like prime targets for an easy kill. Yet, Captain Shimada was an experienced aviator who was determined not to be taken down easily. What followed turned into a tense, prolonged engagement, an intense running battle that kept both sides on edge. Already engaged when McDonald's flight arrived on the scene, the Japanese aircraft faced relentless pressure from the pursuing Thunderbolts. Sergeant Yokogi's Sona was struck by cannon fire from Lieutenant Wade Lewis. The left wing burst into flames, and the aircraft began to trail smoke. As the enemy plane attempted to escape, Lieutenant J.C. Haslip maneuvered behind it and opened fire with a long burst, causing the damaged aircraft to dive into the sea, trailing smoke from its ruined wing. Meanwhile, Captain Shimada's aircraft continued to fight fiercely. For an astonishing 30 minutes, he managed to outmaneuver multiple attacking P-38s, weaving and banking through violent turns that tested the limits of both pilot and aircraft. Shimada threw his plane into aggressive maneuvers, ripping through maximum rate turns with wings streaming condensation, a visual testament to the intense stress and effort he was exerting. Despite the P-38 pilots' attempts to line up their shots and gain precise control of the engagement, they found it challenging to hold the target in their sights. The Japanese, in the chaos of aerial combat, the swift and unpredictable maneuvers of enemy fighters, often forced American pilots into desperate defensive tactics. One such moment unfolded when Captain Danforth Miller, the wingman of McDonald, found himself in a tense standoff. As the engagement intensified, Miller managed to briefly bring his gun sight onto the Sonya, a Japanese aircraft, aiming to score a critical hit. However, just as he prepared to fire, the Japanese pilot Shimada executed a sharp, hard left turn, slipping out of Miller's precise aim. Miller's tracers flew into the air, falling about 80 feet behind the fleeing Sonya, highlighting how close yet frustratingly elusive the target remained. What happened next, however, defied the usual evasive patterns seen in dogfights. Instead of continuing to dodge and weave to avoid the relentless pursuit of the American fighters, Shimada suddenly made a startling, bold decision. Instead of breaking away or retreating, he turned his nose directly towards the approaching aircraft commanded by Lindberg. To Lindberg, who had flown countless hours in the skies but had never been faced with a hostile aircraft intent on killing him, this moment was starkly clear and edged with a sense of impending doom. Shimada's aircraft held a steady course, seemingly committing to a face-to-face encounter or perhaps even a ramming attack, a desperate and risky maneuver. The two aircraft now faced each other head-on at a closing speed of nearly 500 miles per hour, a blistering and deadly convergence. For Lindberg, the situation crystallized in a flash. This was a critical moment of life or death, and the decision he made next could determine the outcome. In an almost instinctive response, Lindberg fixated on the Sonya's radial engine, the key to damaging the aircraft's ability to continue fighting. Without hesitation, he squeezed the trigger of his P38 Lightning's guns, unleashing a burst of fire. His aircraft's armament, comprising a single 20mm cannon and 450 caliber machine guns concentrated in the nose, fired in rapid succession for 0.6 seconds. The storm of bullets and shells tore into the front of the Sonya, hitting with devastating precision. As the barrage raged on, the Mitsubishi's propeller visibly slowed, a stark sign that the attack had compromised its engine severely. Smoke billowed from its engine compartment, a sign of the internal damage inflicted. Yet, Shimada maintained his course, undeterred, perhaps driven by desperation or a hope to exchange fire at close range, a tactic often attempted in hopes of disabling an opponent or causing chaos. Meanwhile, Lindberg continued firing, relentless in his assault. At the last possible moment, Lindberg executed a violent pull-up maneuver, forcing his P-38 upward just in time. His aircraft soared over the damaged Sonya, missing it by mere feet, a narrow escape from disaster. Shimada's aircraft responded by plunging into a steep dive, a desperate attempt to evade the damage inflicted during the attack. Additional bursts from other American P-38s fired into the descending Mitsubishi, aiming to ensure the kill. Ultimately, the Sonya continued its uncontrolled descent, trailing smoke like a dying beast plunging into the ocean. It hit the water at high velocity, creating a powerful splash and sending a fountain of white spray into the air. Concentric circles of foam spread outward on the surface, only to be swallowed again by the returning calm of the sea. The waters seemed as unaltered as before, hiding the tragic fate of the aircraft and its crew. The bodies of Captain Saburo Shimada and his observer were lost to the depths, their aircraft and lives extinguished in the aftermath. Back at the base, the discussion over who deserved the credit for the kill heated up among the pilots. Multiple aircraft had delivered damaging hits, McDonald, Miller, and Lindberg. Yet it was Lindberg's head-on burst that ultimately incapacitated the Sonya, forcing it into a fatal dive by slowing its propeller and damaging its engine irreparably. Unofficially, the pilots agreed that Lindberg had achieved his first and only aerial victory in combat. Despite this, the victory was never officially recorded in the 475th Fighter Group's war tally, as Lindberg was a civilian volunteer, not an active military officer. His participation in combat had already been irregular and somewhat unofficial, which complicated the formal recognition of his kill. Recording such an achievement could have raised questions about his status and perhaps jeopardized his continued involvement with the unit. Just 3 days later, on the 1st of August, Lindberg's luck nearly ran out. During a fighter sweep mission targeting the Palau Islands, his formation encountered Japanese Zero fighters. A fierce dogfight erupted, and Lindberg found himself engaged in a turning fight with a Zero pilot who almost succeeded in shooting him down. It was only through a timely call from McDonald, shouting, brake right, and MacDonald himself engaging the enemy Zero to divert its attention, that Lindbergh's on the 12th of August in the year 1944. A significant event marked the departure of Lindberg from Hollandia, signaling his return home after a pivotal period of service and innovation. A gathering of the pilots from the 475th Fighter Group assembled to bid him farewell, a gesture that was underpinned by more than mere formality. It was a heartfelt recognition of his genuine respectability and the profound influence he had on their operations. Lindbergh's role extended beyond that of a civilian technical expert. He was a mentor who had not only imparted advanced techniques that dramatically expanded their combat capabilities but had also fought alongside them, sharing the perils of combat in environments where rank, reputation, or fame carried little weight. His contributions, particularly in enhancing fuel efficiency, resonated far beyond the confines of the 475th Fighter Group, spreading throughout the Pacific theater. By the time October of 1944 arrived, virtually all P38 Lightning units operating across the vast expanse of the Pacific had adopted variants of his cruise control procedures. While the specifics of these techniques varied slightly depending on the particular unit and operational conditions, the underlying principle remained consistently effective. Reducing engine revolutions per minute, increasing manifold pressure, and leaning the fuel mixture collectively contributed to significantly extending the fighter's operational range. The strategic consequences of these technical improvements were substantial and far-reaching. Thanks to these innovations, certain targets and objectives that had previously been out of reach became accessible. Japanese military installations, which had benefited from the protection of fighter escort range limitations, could now be approached confidently by P-38 formations equipped with enough fuel to escort bombers deep into enemy territory and return safely home. This extended range transformed the tactical landscape, allowing fighters to accompany bombers on longer missions that, until then, had been carried out without escort or not attempted at all. The implications of this increased reach were especially evident in the Pacific, where long-range fighter sweeps into previously inaccessible areas became routine. For instance, P-38 groups operating out of Dutch New Guinea began flying missions spanning approximately 950 miles, engaging in combat for about a quarter of an hour, and returning to base all within the same operational cycle. Such daring missions, which would have been impossible before Lindbergh's fuel-saving techniques gained widespread adoption, opened new frontiers for offensive and defensive operations. The impact of these range extensions was not merely academic, it was decisive in supporting ongoing campaigns, particularly in the latter half of 1944. The expanded reach enabled operations that directly contributed to General MacArthur's campaign advancing toward the Philippines. Previously, supporting airfields further into enemy territory could not be maintained due to limited fighter range, but with the new techniques, forward bases could now be established and sustained, accelerating invasion plans that had been delayed by logistical constraints. The overall strategic effect was not solely measured in miles flown but also in the crucial aspect of time saved. Where once months would have been necessary to achieve certain objectives, the extended range and increased operational tempo allowed these tasks to be completed in a matter of weeks. This acceleration had a dual benefit. It shortened the timeline of critical campaigns and significantly reduced the risks faced by pilots. For example, pilots who might have previously had to retreat prematurely with dwindling fuel reserves now found themselves equipped with enough fuel reserves to handle emergencies, such as unforeseen weather detours or combat damage. In the past, encountering bad weather or having to deviate from planned routes could result in the loss of aircraft, but the additional fuel reserves provided a vital safety margin, improving survivability. Pilots suffering from combat damage now had a better chance of reaching home safely rather than being forced to bail out or crash due to insufficient fuel. These improvements in fuel management and range directly contributed to lower overall combat losses, especially those resulting from non-combat causes such as accidents, environmental hazards, or mechanical failures. This enhancement in operational capability proved particularly crucial during the liberation of the Philippines. When General MacArthur's forces launched their invasion of Leyte in October 1944, P-38 fighters based in New Guinea and Morotai could offer protective cover over distances that had once been deemed impossible to sustain. The difference was stark. Rather than approaching with only moments of fuel remaining, fighters could now reach vital targets with an hour or more of fuel in reserve, ensuring effective escort and combat support. Such a margin of safety was the difference between merely appearing over the target and genuinely providing meaningful protection. Although these revolutionary techniques of fuel management and range extension brought numerous advantages, their adoption was not without initial resistance and controversy. Some commanding officers harbored concerns over the potential risks to engine reliability due to the adjustments in operating parameters. Meanwhile, some pilots remained skeptical, hesitant to trust new procedures that diverged from traditional practices. Nonetheless, the proven benefits in operational flexibility, safety, and strategic reach gradually won acceptance and became standard practice across many units, transforming the capabilities of Allied air power in the Pacific theater during this critical phase of the war. Their training programs often prioritized practicality and technical proficiency over the more theoretical and generalized advice given to civilians. Some maintenance officers were particularly concerned that implementing Lindbergh's innovative engine management techniques might accelerate wear and tear on aircraft engines, potentially leading to more frequent repairs or failures. Despite these concerns, the evidence gathered from operational data was compelling and difficult to dismiss. Units that adopted Lindbergh's methods consistently reported that engine failures did not increase and, in fact, the overall reliability appeared to improve. Fuel consumption figures provided even more dramatic validation of Lindbergh's approach. In numerous operational reports, pilots and engineers documented significant reductions in fuel use, which translated into longer mission ranges and increased operational flexibility. These successful missions demonstrated that aircraft equipped with Lindbergh's techniques could achieve objectives that had previously been considered unattainable due to fuel limitations. The tangible, measurable benefits prompted a shift in official doctrine. By the end of the year 1844, Lindbergh's cruise control technique became an integral part of the standard operating procedures for the P-38 Lightning aircraft. What initially started as a cautious observation by civilian technical representatives gradually evolved into a fundamental aspect of military aviation strategy. The United States Army Air Forces took note of the improvements and officially updated their charts for managing the P-38's engine performance, incorporating Lindbergh's discoveries into their official reference materials. Pilot training programs were overhauled as well, now emphasizing the correct procedures for leaning the mixture at peak power settings, aligning pilot actions with Lindbergh's proven methodology. Looking beyond the technical achievements, the broader narrative of Lindbergh's service in the Pacific theater reveals a man driven by a complex web of motives and beliefs. His pre-war stance as an isolationist had already made him a divisive figure within the aviation community and the public. Furthermore, his public comments on aviation technology in Nazi Germany, which some interpreted as sympathetic, earned him accusations of harboring Nazi sympathies, an accusation that tarnished his reputation further amidst the tense political climate of the time. His vocal opposition to American involvement in World War II effectively severed his relationship with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, leaving Lindberg politically isolated and often vilified by the media and policymakers. Despite this, Lindberg's remarkable flying skills and technical acumen earned him respect among his peers. In the isolated and challenging environment of the Pacific, away from the political spotlight, he found a form of redemption through demonstrated competence and valuable technical contributions. His fellow pilots, both from the Marine Corps and the Army Air Forces, evaluated him not based on his controversial political views but on his exceptional flying ability and personal courage. Major Richard Bong, America's top ace with a record of 40 confirmed victories, achieved while serving with V Fighter Command and various units across the theater, once remarked to a United Press correspondent that Lindberg was as hot a pilot as any of us. Bong added, he would have been out there knocking off Japs every day if General Kenny had let him, emphasizing that Lindberg's skills were as formidable as any in the skies. A declaration of such caliber from a pilot of Bong's stature carried immense weight, surpassing any political or public reintegration Lindberg might have hoped for. It demonstrated that Lindberg had proven his worth in the most critical arena of all, combat, where results and skill speak louder than words. After returning to the United States in mid-August of 1844, Lindberg continued to contribute his expertise to the ongoing war effort, channeling his focus into technical innovation and strategic analysis. By October, he was actively involved in a joint conference between the Army and Navy at Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland, where discussions centered around the performance of fighter aircraft. During this period, Lindberg also took part in the evaluation of captured Japanese aircraft, providing invaluable insights into enemy technology and capabilities. His consulting work extended to prominent aircraft manufacturers like United Aircraft, where he helped troubleshoot and resolve issues encountered during combat operations. These efforts underscored his significant impact on wartime aviation beyond mere flying. Examining the technical specifications of the aircraft he worked on reveals the scale of Lindberg's contributions. For example, the P38 Lightning featured a considerable internal fuel capacity, about 410 gallons in standard tanks, comprising two main tanks holding 90 gallons each, two reserve tanks of 60 gallons apiece, and two additional leading-edge tanks of 55 gallons, with the capability to attach external drop tanks for longer missions. Under typical cruise conditions, set at 2,200 revolutions per minute with an auto-rich mixture, its total fuel capacity could exceed 1,000 gallons. Fuel consumption rates varied depending on operational conditions and engine settings, but it was generally much higher than what Lindberg's lean mixture techniques achieved. His method of mixture control dramatically reduced the aircraft's fuel consumption, ensuring longer range and endurance, which were critical advantages in the vast Pacific theater. This improvement not only heightened operational efficiency but also contributed significantly to mission success, showcasing the profound impact of his technical innovations in wartime aviation. The total fuel consumption for this aircraft, when operating at its maximum efficiency, was approximately 70 gallons per hour. This figure represented a significant advancement in operational capability, especially in terms of the aircraft's range. In fact, the combat radius, the distance the aircraft could effectively cover on a single sortie, was notably increased from around 570 miles to approximately 750 miles. This improvement amounted to an impressive 31% enhancement in operational reach, all while maintaining the same allocations for combat and reserve fuel loads. Such an increase meant that the aircraft could now undertake longer missions without the need for additional fuel tanks, thereby simplifying logistics and operational planning. Moreover, when missions demanded even greater range, the combination of extra auxiliary drop tanks and innovative cruising techniques allowed pilots to fly missions that lasted nearly 9 hours. These extended flights enabled aircraft to cover distances exceeding 1,000 miles in a single sortie. Such capabilities were revolutionary, shifting the strategic landscape of Pacific theater operations and dramatically expanding the scope of possible missions. These technological and tactical improvements fundamentally transformed how military aviation was conducted across the vast Pacific region. The island hopping campaign, which was a defining feature of General MacArthur's advance through New Guinea and ultimately toward the Philippines, depended heavily on achieving and maintaining air superiority at every stage. The ability to project fighter range influenced the strategic decision-making process, dictating which islands could be bypassed through the use of long-range aircraft and which required direct assaults to establish airfields and supply bases. By extending aircraft range, the innovative techniques pioneered by Lindberg enabled a more daring and flexible operational approach. Islands that previously would have necessitated expensive and complex amphibious assaults could now be effectively bypassed, thanks to fighters capable of reaching targets from more distant bases. This not only saved resources but also reduced risks to personnel. Some historians, however, have mistakenly linked Lindbergh's range-extending methods to a specific mission conducted in April of 1943, during which P-38 fighters based at Guadalcanal intercepted and shot down Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's transport aircraft. That particular mission indeed pushed the flight limits of the Lightning fighters, but Lindberg had no involvement in it. He did not arrive in the Pacific theater until over a year later. What Lindberg contributed was the foundational conceptual development that made such extraordinarily long-range missions routine, rather than extraordinary exceptions. His work laid the groundwork for the consistent use of extended range tactics in subsequent operations. The human element in Lindbergh's achievement is equally significant and warrants recognition. At the time he was deployed to the Pacific, he was 42 years old, a seasoned veteran, flying combat missions against opponents often 20 years his junior. The physical demands placed on pilots, maintaining proper hygiene and maneuvering aircraft effectively, combined with the intense psychological stress of combat, made each mission challenging. Additionally, flights lasting anywhere from 7 to 9 hours in a cramped cockpit exacted a toll on even the most resilient pilots. Despite these hardships, Lindberg never sought special treatment or privileges. He participated in the same perilous missions, faced identical dangers, and adhered to the same procedures as the youngest lieutenants and captains of the 475th Fighter Squadron. His willingness to lead by example was instrumental in convincing others of the practicality and effectiveness of his techniques. A critical aspect of Lindbergh's influence was his personal demonstration of these methods. Had he merely delivered theoretical lectures from the safety of headquarters, his ideas might have been dismissed as academic speculation disconnected from the realities of combat. Instead, Lindbergh's readiness to fly missions himself, continually validating that his fuel management and operational strategies worked under combat conditions, earned him unparalleled credibility. No amount of rank or reputation could substitute for the first-hand experience he provided. Beyond technical prowess, Lindbergh's success also had significant psychological and strategic implications. It proved that civilian technical expertise could be invaluable in a military context. Although military organizations traditionally prioritized rank and combat experience, modern warfare's increasing complexity required specialized knowledge that often existed outside the military hierarchy. Lindberg demonstrated convincingly that civilians with relevant technical backgrounds, such as engineers and researchers, could make vital contributions to combat effectiveness and operational success. His achievements encouraged military leaders to pay closer attention to the insights offered by civilian specialists, including representatives from aircraft manufacturers, engine development companies, and research institutions. The broader implication was that effective modern warfare depended not solely on battlefield heroism or seniority but also on the integration of advanced technical knowledge, regardless of its source. Lindberg's work and reputation thus helped foster a more collaborative and innovative approach to military operations, blending practical combat experience with cutting-edge scientific and technological expertise. The collaboration between military personnel and civilian engineers, which was often based on mutual trust and shared expertise, significantly accelerated the pace of technological advancement during the course of the war. This close partnership allowed innovations to be tested and implemented more swiftly, ultimately enhancing the effectiveness of the Allied forces. One of the most notable aircraft that emerged from this synergy was the P38 Lightning, an aircraft that can be regarded as a true reflection of Lindberg's pioneering techniques and innovations. Its distinctive twin-engine configuration not only contributed to its impressive performance but also provided the crucial redundancy necessary for experimentation and operational safety, making it a versatile and resilient fighter aircraft. The P-38 was powered by the Allison V-1710 engines, which, despite facing ongoing criticism over some of their operational issues, responded remarkably well when managed with precision, particularly through meticulous regulation of fuel mixture. The aircraft's sophisticated fuel system, comprising multiple tanks interconnected by transfer pumps, granted pilots significant control, enabling them to optimize fuel consumption during extended missions. Such careful management was vital for maximizing range and endurance. Moreover, the inherent stability of the P-38 made it exceptionally suitable for long-distance cruising, allowing pilots to undertake lengthy flights over vast stretches of ocean and land with confidence. By the end of the year 1944 and the beginning of 1945, the P-38 began to be gradually replaced in several combat theaters by the P-51 Mustang, an aircraft that offered superior high-altitude performance and extended operational range with the same amount of fuel. Yet, despite this transition in some regions, the P-38 remained a vital asset in the Pacific theater throughout the entire war. Its twin engines provided a safety margin during over-water flights, significantly reducing the risk of catastrophe in case of engine failure. Its formidable armament furnished it with devastating firepower, capable of delivering powerful strikes against both enemy aircraft and ground targets. The P-38's maneuverability at low and medium altitudes aligned perfectly with the unique combat environment of the Pacific, where dogfights and ground attack missions often unfolded at these levels. Its range, particularly when operated using Lindberg's innovative techniques, remained extraordinary and a key advantage. Over the course of the war, the aircraft's impressive performance statistics underscored its significance. For instance, the 475th Fighter Group, which operated exclusively P-38s, amassed a total of 551 confirmed aerial victories, establishing it as the top P-38 unit of the conflict. Among the pilots flying this aircraft was Major Thomas Maguire, America's second highest scoring ace of the war, who achieved an impressive tally of 38 victories while piloting P-38s with the 475th Fighter Group. The combination of the aircraft's range, firepower, and dependable performance made it the dominant fighter within the Pacific theater. Furthermore, the application of Lindberg's advanced techniques, such as extended range flying, significantly enhanced every aspect of P-38 operation. Missions could be conducted over greater distances, with longer engagement durations, and with improved safety margins. This cumulative impact, achieved through countless sorties and hundreds of thousands of flight hours, was profound, though difficult to quantify fully. The story of the P-38 also highlights a complex and sometimes tense relationship between specialized expertise and military institutions. Lindbergh's outspoken political stances before the war had rendered him unwelcome within official military circles, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt's personal opposition prevented Lindbergh from serving in a formal capacity within the armed forces. Despite this, the U.S. Army Air Forces recognized the immense value of Lindbergh's expertise and the potential benefits his knowledge could bring to the war effort. As a result, he was allowed to operate unofficially as a civilian, with informal authorization to participate in combat missions, an arrangement that was irregular and, by modern standards, likely to have violated military regulations. Nevertheless, this pragmatic approach proved highly effective. This unconventional solution proved instrumental in leveraging Lindbergh's talents, ultimately contributing greatly to the Allied victory. The men who flew alongside Lindbergh in 1944 never forgot his contributions, nor the profound influence he had on their flying capabilities. Decades later, interviews with former pilots of the 475th Fighter Group revealed a deep respect for the civilian aviator who had flown with them as an equal and who had shown them how to stretch the limits of their flying abilities. Colonel Warren Lewis, who commanded the 432nd Fighter Squadron, recalled Lindbergh's fuel-saving settings with remarkable precision, even after many years, testifying to the lasting impact of Lindbergh's techniques and teachings. While specific details sometimes varied among different accounts, reflecting adaptations to different aircraft models or operational conditions, the underlying principles remained consistent. The universal nature of Lindbergh's methods and their indisputable results demonstrated how innovative thinking could significantly influence military aviation. Charles Augustus Lindbergh, the legendary aviator and innovator, passed away in August, marking the end of a remarkable chapter in aviation history that underscored the power of ingenuity, collaboration, and tenacity in the face of adversity. On the 26th of August, in the year 1974, at the age of 72, a notable life came to a quiet end when he succumbed to lymphoma at his home nestled in the serene landscape of Kipahula, Maui. His passing marked the closing chapter of a remarkable journey, one that had taken him across continents and through pivotal moments of history. Prior to his death, he had discreetly left the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York City on the 17th of August, managing to travel across the vast Atlantic and the United States to reach the tranquil shores of Maui just a single week before his final moments. This swift and secretive departure underscored the quiet dignity with which he faced the inevitable, choosing instead to spend his remaining days in a place of personal significance and peace. Following his passing, a modest yet meaningful funeral was held, with only a handful of loved ones and acquaintances in attendance. Approximately 15 individuals gathered to pay their respects. The burial took place shortly after his death, roughly 3 hours later, in a simple yet heartfelt ceremony. His resting place was marked by a handcrafted concrete slab, a humble marker that bore an inscription from one of the Psalms, Psalm 139, an ancient verse that speaks to the omnipresence of divine understanding and the profound mystery of life. The grave itself was a deepened niche, about 30 feet in depth, lined with rugged volcanic lava rocks and scattered black beach pebbles, a testament to the rugged landscape and natural beauty of the Hawaiian Islands where he found his final peace. His grave was located within the grounds of Palapala Church Cemetery, a tranquil site that seems to mirror the solemnity of his life and legacy. The simplicity of his burial arrangements reflected perhaps his own modesty and humility, qualities that marked his approach to both life and work. The small number of attendees underlined the personal and intimate nature of his farewell, contrasting with the broader impact of his work and contributions across multiple fields. In addition to his earthly journey, part of his enduring legacy is preserved through the personal writings he left behind, notably his journals from his wartime service, published in 1970. These journals offer detailed insights into his experiences in the Pacific theater during the war, especially during his time with the 475th Fighter Squadron. They serve as a window into his first-hand account of combat, strategy, and the challenges faced by those who fought in the vast and demanding Pacific battlefield. These writings not only document his military endeavors but also highlight the skills and principles he applied in high-stakes situations, principles that continue to hold relevance even decades later. The influence of Lindbergh's service in the Pacific extends far beyond the specific techniques he developed or taught. His work exemplified fundamental principles that remain pertinent in both military and civilian contexts. Chief among these is the understanding that technical expertise is vital in combat operations, where every decision and technique can have profound consequences. He demonstrated that skilled, knowledgeable personnel could significantly influence outcomes, and that civilian specialists, if given the proper opportunities, could contribute meaningfully alongside seasoned military personnel. Furthermore, his approach underscored the importance of questioning established procedures and processes. When evidence suggests the possibility of improvement, existing institutional practices must be scrutinized and revised. Personal demonstration emerged as a particularly persuasive method of convincing others. Showing rather than merely telling often had more impact, especially when dealing with complex or counterintuitive concepts. Lindbergh understood that true mastery involves continuous refinement. There is always room for enhancement, even within systems that seem to be fully developed and optimized. At its core, Lindbergh's achievements in the Pacific represent a remarkable convergence of specialized knowledge and operational necessity. The theater demanded fighters with exceptional range capabilities, conditions that challenged existing procedures which limited aircraft performance below their inherent potential. Lindbergh, with his deep expertise in fuel management, developed over decades of dedicated focus on efficiency, was uniquely positioned to bridge this gap. His insights allowed him to apply his knowledge in real combat scenarios, where measurable results could be observed and evaluated, ultimately demonstrating the power of expert-driven innovation. What set Lindbergh apart was not merely his technical proficiency but his willingness to personally demonstrate his methods, risking his life to prove their validity. His approach fostered trust and credibility among pilots, who saw his techniques in action rather than merely hearing about them. He regarded his colleagues as equals, working alongside them and sharing his expertise without demanding recognition based solely on reputation or fame. This collaborative spirit fostered an environment where learning was mutual and where practical results trumped hierarchical authority. The story of German prisoners of war witnessing the might of American industry and technology offers a parallel illustration of transformation, not through force alone, but through overwhelming evidence of capability and precision. Similarly, Lindbergh's story embodies the transformation that occurs when technical expertise is effectively demonstrated and applied. Both narratives reveal that victory in such contexts often hinges not on brute strength but on knowledge, skill, and the confident application of proven methods. Their stories also exemplify a vital lesson: that even systems or Lindbergh's influence in the Pacific theater extended far beyond the mere tally of combat victories or the number of missions flown. Instead, It lay rooted in the profound knowledge he shared and the innovative techniques he introduced to those around him. His role transitioned from an observer, quietly studying the intricacies of aircraft operation and tactics, to a mentor, imparting insights that transformed the way pilots understood their machines. When he arrived, he carried with him the aura of a celebrity, a figure celebrated for his pioneering achievements, yet he departed as a trusted comrade, having forged genuine relationships with the men he taught. The core of Lindberg's legacy was his ability to elevate aircraft performance not through cutting-edge technological breakthroughs, but through a deep comprehension of how airplanes truly worked. His approach involved uncovering hidden capabilities by thoroughly understanding the mechanics and operational limits of aircraft, and most importantly, having the boldness to challenge and improve upon existing methods. Lindberg believed that the perceived boundaries of an aircraft's performance could be pushed further if one simply knew how to manage resources more effectively and understood the true potential lying beneath the surface. The pilots of Satan's Angels, a renowned fighter squadron, recognized the profound impact Lindberg's teachings had on their combat effectiveness. Thanks to his insights, they could fly longer distances, cover more ground than their predecessors, engage in extended battles, and return safely from missions that previously might have been considered too risky or demanding. This leap in operational capability was not the result of experimental engineering or laboratory breakthroughs but was instead rooted in the practical application of learned knowledge. Lindberg, a civilian whose background included an exceptional mastery of fuel efficiency and aircraft management, a skill he had honed over the Atlantic 15 years earlier, had unlocked new levels of performance in wartime conditions. The practical knowledge imparted by Lindberg proved its worth in the heat of combat, becoming a cornerstone of tactical innovation across the entire Pacific theater. Its success was a testament to the power of understanding and resourcefulness, fundamentally changing the way American pilots fought and strategized during the air war in the Pacific. This achievement was rare in wartime, as such advances frequently arose from rigorous laboratory research or military engineering departments. Yet, in this instance, the breakthrough emerged from one man's specialized mastery of an art he had perfected over nearly 2 decades. Lindberg's expertise, developed initially over the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean during his pioneering flights, found new relevance and application in the Pacific theater, a different environment, different aircraft, but the same underlying principle. The core idea was simple yet revolutionary. To truly master an aircraft meant understanding it completely, managing resources with precision, and refusing to accept the limits set by published specifications as absolute boundaries. Throughout the summer of 1944, Lindberg dedicated himself to teaching this principle to some of the finest fighter pilots in the Pacific, sharing a philosophy that emphasized mastery over machinery, resourcefulness, and the refusal to be constrained by perceived limitations. For 6 weeks, this knowledge was passed from instructor to student, and from those pilots to others, creating a ripple effect that altered the course of aerial combat in the Pacific. The lessons learned from Lindberg's teachings were not confined to individual pilots but became part of the collective tactical doctrine that would shape the air war. The dissemination of this understanding had an enduring impact, transforming how America's fighters operated, fought, and ultimately gained an advantage in the treacherous skies over the Pacific Islands. This legacy underscores that innovation in wartime does not always depend on new technology but often on the profound comprehension and creative application of existing knowledge, driven by individual mastery and shared with others willing to embrace the challenge.